Hi there, and welcome to Our Weekly Craft, a source for ideas, inspiration, and fun for crafters. I'm Sarah White, Chief Maker at ourdailycraft.com, and today I want to talk about sexism in the crafting industry, which is not a new thing, but there is a new reason that I want to talk about it, a new-ish reason I want to talk about it. First, M is wearing this, I don't even know what I called this. It's a sewing project that might just be called the Sherpa Cowl. I don't know, it's on Our Daily Craft. I will link it in the show notes, but it's like Sherpa on the inside and plaid on the outside, and it's super warm and cozy, which is necessary because even though it's like almost 60 degrees right now, it's going to snow tonight because Arkansas in spring is just like that. So here we are, getting the cold weather stuff out again. I'm wearing the Wave of Change pullover. There's also a cardigan version of this. They're by Bayron Handmade. I'll link those below too. This was probably my first sweater last year, and I really like it. It's bulky yarn, really simple pattern. You just do purl ridges every like 10th round, I can't remember. But I did make the sleeves short unintentionally. So someday I'm gonna go back and actually make the sleeves the length that I would like sleeves to be. So I'm actually out of yarn on the knitting project that I'm working on. So I have this ball or this skein of yarn that I need to wind. I should have gotten it situated before I got here, but that's okay. We'll see if I can get it going and talk to you about Knitting.com at the same time. So I also have some notes. If you see me like looking down, I made some notes because I wanted to get things right while I'm talking about it. So about 3 weeks ago, there was a blog and a podcast on the Knittingcom crew website, which these are guys, it's a couple of guys who seem to make their living from making e-commerce websites in various niches. So they had decided that the next niche that they wanted to take on would be knitting. Never mind that none of them knit. They don't know anything about knitting. In the podcast, which I think has since been removed, this blog post I'm talking about and the podcast were taken down for reasons we'll get to, because they don't like criticism. Too long, didn't read. In the podcast, they referred to sewing, knitting, and crochet pretty much interchangeably. They clearly don't know what they think they're getting into, but they knew that the domain name knitting.com was for sale. There's not a website there, and the person who owns that domain sold it to them for $80,000. And they decided that this was a smart move and that they could build an e-commerce and digital content website with the brand Knitting.com. And their expectation was, I don't know if it's still their expectation, was that they could build it within a year to a brand that would make $80,000 a month in sales. I know what you're thinking. I mean, there are a lot of thoughts. I did think that it was funny. This is one of the things that's on my note, is that in the blog post it said that $80,000 is a lot to pay for a domain name, but that shows their seriousness, because you don't just spend $80,000 on a domain and then not do anything with it. It's not like the $8 on GoDaddy where you buy a bunch of names because you think they're funny or you might do something with them someday, but you never actually do. But he also said, whoever authored the blog post said, that he had very little concern or doubt about spending that much money because it's nearly entirely risk-free because it's such a good domain name, which makes sense, but it wasn't entirely risk-free, as it turns out. They also mentioned in the same now taken down blog post that some of the things they were looking for when they were trying to find a niche and eventually settled on knitting was that it had a reasonably sized, passionate audience that was easily niched down on Facebook, I assume for advertising purposes, and that has a wide product catalog, and that they would be able to improve on existing products. There would be the opportunity for lots of content, including digital products, and that it was a product category that was not saturated on Amazon. Because I think, and I'm not an expert on this, but I think what their idea is that they would have this website and it would have, you know, some original content as well, I think, but that the main goal of it is that it's an e-commerce site that filters people to Amazon, basically. So they're not doing their own fulfillment on products. They're selling Amazon things through Knitting.com. So the reason that the blog post was subsequently taken down is because knitters responded in not very favorable way to their idea that these guys who knew literally nothing about knitting, including how many sticks it uses, could just assume that they could come into the industry, wave some money around, and people would suddenly start visiting their website and buying stuff from them. You know, it's just another example of, I mean, sexism, misogyny is everywhere, right? But it's particularly hurtful, I think, when it comes into a space. You know, knitting as an industry is probably well above 90% female. And, you know, this is probably not the first time that a guy who knows nothing about knitting, or a group of guys who know nothing about knitting or crafting in general, it doesn't just happen in knitting, obviously, but that people will come in thinking that they don't actually need to know about what they're trying to sell. And I'm sure that happens in non-craft things too, but it feels like people see crafting as like a money-making niche. That, you know, there are a lot of people who craft, there are a lot of people who buy yarn, there are a lot of people who knit, and that's true, but that doesn't mean that you can just slide into the industry and people will take you seriously and buy things from you just because you have a cool domain name. You know, those of us who've been in the online knitting world, I would almost say I've been there from the beginning. It's not quite the very beginning, but you know, I remember the days before Ravelry. I remember when Knitty was like revolutionary because it was a place where you could go and find knitting patterns and you knew they were good and they were fun, and you know, and it was like community. That, you know, knitting has existed on the internet for a really long time. And there was something in this blog post too about these grandmas with blogs and that they were going to be better than that. And, you know, a lot of us who have blogs are not grandmas, for one thing. But, you know, being a grandma in the online knitting industry just means you've been around. It means you know stuff. It means you know people. It means you have relationships. It means, you know, that you take it seriously and that you're passionate about it. And these guys are not any of that. So they hired like one person who knows about knitting, and they got really defensive because people were suggesting that they were going to, you know, steal content or get people's knitting patterns for free and try to sell them and all this stuff that they said that they were not going to do. They were like, we're going to have content creators and we're going to pay them fairly and all of that. And I mean, whether that was the plan or not, or if that continues to be the plan, you know, we don't know. But, you know, it just feels like mansplaining in the worst way. That especially, I mean, mansplaining is always bad, obviously, but when you come into a domain that has been, you know, in general, men have been happy to relegate and denigrate crafts as women's work, or not even work, but like hobbies. Ugh, it's a hobby, you know, make it sound worthless or unimportant, or like there's not something magical and like really important happening when we make things and when we talk about making things online and we share that with other people. All of that is really vital stuff. and to come in and be like, I don't care what's out there. We can do it better. We can throw all this money at this problem or whatever that, you know, needs innovating. And we're going to make a lot of money in the process. Well, anyone who's sold anything in the knitting industry could probably tell you that they're not going to make a lot of money in the process. You know, I don't know where they came up with $80,000 a month, but it's not going to be from selling patterns for $10 or less each. You know, even if you've got 100 patterns, that doesn't mean you're going to sell any of them, right? It doesn't mean you get one or two sales a day. You know, that's not gonna, it's gonna take a lot of pattern sales and selling yarn on Amazon to get to $80,000. And some people also commented on, well, you know, serious knitters don't buy yarn on Amazon. And I, you know, I take exception to that a little bit because I have bought yarn on Amazon, usually because it's something I already know that I like and I can just get it shipped faster. And I know that buying my local yarn shop closed. So I know that buying locally is vital and that, you know, that's really important. And of course, when you have a local option, when you have the time, if you're feeling okay about the COVID situation where you live, that you can physically go to a store and look at the yarn and buy things locally, that of course is the best possible option. But there are times when people need to shop on Amazon. You might not live anywhere near a yarn store. You might not have the budget for indie dyed, you know, hand spun or whatever. You know, I used to write the knitting website for about.com, and people would like question me when I used yarn that came from, you know, Hobby Lobby, or that you could buy, you know, the Lion brand that you can buy at Walmart or whatever. And I would say that, you know, you've got to think about the whole of the internet and the world, or at least America, that, you know, not everyone lives where there's a yarn store. Walmart may be the place where you can get yarn. You know, Amazon these days, Amazon didn't really exist back then. Old time. See, I told you. Long time in the online knitting world. But, you know, some people shop at Amazon for yarn and needles and notions of all sorts, and that is fine. And we don't want to say that people shouldn't do that, and that you know, that's not an option that should be available to people. But I also think that people will just go to Amazon directly if they want to buy yarn on Amazon. They will not go to knitting.com because it's knitting.com. And especially if they know who's behind knitting.com, they're like, well, I'd rather give my money just directly to Amazon than to cut you in when, you know, this is your attitude about knitters and knitting, and that you're really just in it for the money. Because that's, I mean, there's no other way to justify saying, you know, we paid all this money for this domain name because it's cool and we think that we can make that money back, you know, exponentially, and that it's not going to be hard. And knitters, you know, whatever, they'll get sucked in by our fancy URL and suddenly start buying products from us. You know, I mean, it sounds silly, right? Like, I don't know where people get the idea that they can just go into a niche they know nothing about and, you know, hoodwink people, basically, like get people to buy from them because they have a fancy website and a good domain name. So that's not how knitting works. You know, it's just not. And I wish that it's a story that surprised me, because it really doesn't. I mean, the I won't even call it backlash, but the response to it, I wouldn't say is surprising either, because the knitting industry, I mean, we're practiced at like defending ourselves, and we know that, you know, not everything is perfect in the industry, that there's, even without these guys, there can be, you know, some sexism, there can be racism, there can be all the stuff that's out in the world that's not great, can be found in any industry. But I feel like knitters have been more vocal, and we've been more like willing to learn. And that's not everyone, obviously. Knitting is not a microcosm, or not a monolith. Got my M words messed up. Knitting is not a monolith. Not everyone who knits is, you know, into Black Lives Matter or supporting trans kids or whatever. But there's definitely a population of knitters who are, you know, aware of the problems that there have been in the community and who are consciously trying to do better, and who are, you know, rightly, you know, defensive is the wrong word probably, but, you know, who rightly will stand up for people in the industry and then for the industry itself, because we've been here for all these years when nobody cared if it was a lucrative niche or not. We just did it because we love it, and we've, you know, been here writing websites and their grandma blogs and writing books and sharing patterns and educating each other. And sometimes those are things that make money, and sometimes they're not, and a lot of times they're not. You know, you can't charge for teaching someone to knit by and large these days, because there are YouTube videos and there are blogs, and you can check out a book from the library, and there are a million ways that people can learn how to knit without paying for anything but their supplies. And so I feel like, you know, it's hard to say like, oh, we're gonna build this thing that's just gonna make money, because there are a lot of things involved that don't make you money. You know, if you're selling patterns, well, that's great, but if people don't know how to knit or they don't know the skills yet, you've got to build in that education, and you're not necessarily able to charge for that, as an example. You know, and there are a lot of things that people, even pattern sellers who make a lot of money, which there are some, obviously, you know, they are doing a lot of behind the scenes things that don't make them any money. They're doing knit alongs, they're doing educational stuff on their blogs, they're posting on Instagram, they're, you know, doing pattern support. There's all this stuff that it's not just, you know, developing patterns themselves takes time, takes money. You're, you know, tech editing, you're test knitting. It's not as simple as just paying someone to write a pattern, putting it on the internet, and somebody's, you know, and thousands of people are going to buy it, right? So I'm digressing like a whole lot, but it's just like, I don't know. It's a tale as old as time, you know, people thinking they know better than the people who have been in an industry or in a world view for years, and it hurts, you know, when it's something that you're passionate about. And, you know, the insinuation that everyone who's been in the industry all this time is just doing it wrong, right? That we could all be making $80,000 a month if only we knew the secrets of the e-com bros, right? I don't know. It's silly. But anyway, that's been like grinding my gears a little bit for a few weeks. It will be interesting to see. I think the latest messages from them on that, or like they took down the original blog post and it became a blog post about, we're really surprised that we got all this criticism, and we want you to know that we hear you and we're listening and we're reading all the comments, which they deleted from their website, but whatever. You know, that they want to do it right, and they want, you know, to hire experts and pay people to produce patterns and all of this stuff. But then I think since then they've said, oh, we didn't realize that we were going to have this negative reaction to us coming into this industry we know nothing about, and telling everybody that they don't know what they're doing and we can do it better and make tons of money in the process. I don't know what they expected. Did they expect the meek women to stick to their knitting and let the men come in and handle it and do everything better? I don't know. Maybe they're not sexist. I don't know. It seems a little sexist. Anyway, I will be keeping an eye on developments at Knitting.com and see what happens, and not spending a dime there, obviously, ever. But I am curious to know where you go from there and how you be like, okay, you know, we listened to you after we deleted all your comments and everything's fine now and you should come spend money. Yeah, I don't know how that works. Anyway, I've gone on long enough. I didn't really have any like good read watch things right now anyway, so we'll catch up on those next week. I would love to know if you have been following the Knitting.com debacle, if you have thoughts, feelings about the knitting industry and whether dudes should just wander in because they think they can make money here. And yeah, and I mean, it is a larger conversation than just knitting, obviously. People who don't know things about the craft industry come in all the time thinking that they can do things better. But anyway, I would love to know your thoughts. And look, I managed to finish my ball of yarn just in the nick of time to say that I hope that you have a crafty week and don't buy your knitting supplies from bros who think that they know more than you. And maybe that's the post. Yeah, don't buy knitting supplies from bros who don't know anything about knitting. In any case, have a great week. I'll see you next time.